Dealt with parental drama when my mother confessed to favoring my sibling in the will due to a secret from my birth, causing an identity crisis and moral conflict that peaked during a family gathering with unexpected revelations about paternity. I was already tired by the time I pulled into my mother's driveway that evening, and I swear the air felt heavier than usual, like the humidity had settled in just to make everything feel harder. I was 24, trying to figure out my own life in Cedar Grove, working at a repair shop and saving for a small apartment, but I still came home whenever my mother called because that was what I had always done. My name is Laren, and I grew up thinking my family was simple, plain, predictable, nothing fancy at all, just my mother, my older sister Nora who is 32, and my father who died when I was 11. I always thought I understood us, even when I did not understand myself. That night, when I saw my mother sitting at the kitchen table with her hands flat on the wood like she was holding something down, I felt something shift inside me. She did not look sick, but she looked like someone who had been talking to herself for hours. I walked in slow, trying not to start anything, and I asked if she needed something fixed or moved or lifted. She shook her head, and her voice cracked when she said my name. That was the first sign that something was off because she usually sounded strong even when she was hiding things from me. She told me that she had been thinking about her will. I thought it was one of those normal parent things, like planning ahead, but then she said she had already changed it. She said she had decided to give most of what she had to Nora. She said it fast, like ripping off a bandage, but she could not look at me when she said it. For a moment I tried to take it like a mature adult, but inside it felt like someone had pressed a hand to my chest. I asked her why, and she said Nora needed more help. She said Nora was always the one who carried responsibility. I told her I wasn't mad about money, and I wasn't lying, but something was off. It felt like she was telling me more with what she wasn't saying. I sat beside her then and just waited for her to explain. My mother wasn't the type to speak in circles, but that night, she kept wiping her fingers on her jeans, staring at the fridge like she was trying to read some message on the metal. She said there were things about my birth that she had never told me, things she had carried alone for years. When she finally looked at me, her eyes looked older than they had earlier that day. She said she didn't want me to hate her. That's when my stomach tightened. I told her to just say it. I had no idea that my whole life was about to bend in the middle like a tree in a storm. She said that my father, the one I grew up loving, the one whose old watch I kept in my drawer, was not my biological father. The words hit hard because I had never once questioned that man. He had taught me how to ride a bike. He had driven me to school when it snowed too much. He had told me to stand up straight when I walked. He was gone, and now I was hearing something that made me feel like I had dreamt him. I couldn't breathe at first. I remember staring at the salt shaker like it could answer something for me. I asked her who my real father was. She said she would tell me, but not yet. She said she had planned to tell both me and Nora together during a family gathering she was planning for the next week. She said she wanted to explain everything once, in one place, so she wouldn't break twice. I couldn't understand why she hadn't told me earlier, why she told Nora first, why Nora had known for months and had somehow kept this secret and talked to me like everything was normal. I was angry at both of them for that, angry in a way that made my voice shake. My mom said she favored Nora in the will because Nora had been helping her handle this secret, because Nora had been the one to say she couldn't carry it anymore. She said Nora had been the one to push her to tell the truth. I tried holding still, but my thoughts were jumping. I thought about being a kid and sometimes feeling a little out of place, like I didn't look like anyone else in the family except maybe in the dark parts of my hair. I thought about how teachers used to say I had different features from my sister. I thought about how Mom always hugged me a little tighter around my birthday, like she was reminding herself that I belong. I thought about every little moment I'd brushed off, and suddenly nothing felt random. I asked again who he was. She wouldn't say. She said the gathering was important, and I had to be there. I asked if he knew about me. She said yes. She said he never came forward, but he knew. She said she'd kept that door closed because she thought it would protect everyone. When she said that, my chest felt tight, like my life had been shaped around a secret I'd never agreed to. I did not yell. I did not want to. I just felt tired and different, like someone had taken my name and handed it back with a crack in the middle. I asked if Nora saw me differently. She said Nora loved me. She said this didn't change anything about how she saw me, but it changed how I saw myself. Sitting there in that old kitchen with the crooked light above us, I felt like I was fading around the edges. For a long time, I said nothing. My mother kept trying to reach across the table, but I kept pulling my hands back without meaning to. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to keep myself from falling apart. When I finally stood up to leave, she asked me to promise I would come to the gathering. I nodded because words felt too heavy. I walked out into the warm night and sat in my car with the engine off, staring at my own reflection in the window, trying to see something familiar in my own face. Nothing felt the same. The week that led up to the family gathering was unbearable. I tried to act normal at work, fixing transmissions, changing oil, dealing with grumpy customers, but every time I wiped my hands on a rag, every time I smelled gasoline, it was like my own skin was pulling me back into that kitchen and the secret that had just been dropped on me. I kept thinking about my real father, whoever he was, and what kind of man he could be, and if he looked like me, or maybe like Nora, or maybe someone I had never seen. It was impossible to focus on anything, and when I called Nora, she sounded like she was walking on eggshells too. She is 32, methodical, always measured, but even her voice trembled when she said she understood how I felt, and I could hear her heart racing on the line. She didn't tell me much, just reminded me to come to Mom's, that everything would be explained there, and that she would be there with me. I hated the idea of being soothed by her when she was the one who had known, but I agreed because I had no choice. On the day of the gathering, I left my apartment earlier than usual, drove slowly down the familiar streets of Cedar Grove, noticing things I had never noticed before. The way the sun glinted off the corner store window, the smell of bread from the bakery, the chatter of kids walking home from school, all of it feeling suddenly strange, like I was seeing it through a different lens. When I got to Mom's, cars were already parked in the driveway, and I could see Aunt Marlene setting up tables in the backyard, talking to my cousin, Ezra, who is 28, about flowers or something. My mother waved from the porch and smiled at me, but it was the kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes, and it made my chest tighten. I walked up slowly, greeting everyone, trying to act like nothing had changed, but every laugh, every hug, every clink of a plate reminded me that my life had already changed, and nothing could undo it. Mom ushered me into the living room where Nora was sitting with her legs crossed, looking calm, elegant, almost untouchable, and I felt a wave of frustration because she always looked like she had it together. She gave me a quick hug and whispered that she was glad I came. We sat there, awkward, while people mingled, and I tried to focus on the smell of roasted chicken and fresh baked bread to anchor myself, but it didn't work. Eventually, my mother called everyone to sit down at the table, and she started talking about how grateful she was to have family, and then she said she wanted to tell us something important. I felt my stomach twist when she glanced at me, and then at Nora, and my mind raced. She began with a story about my father, not the man I had grown up calling Dad, but the man who had been in her life before him. She told us how young she had been, how complicated things were, and how decisions had been made that were intended to protect everyone, even if it meant keeping secrets. I listened, trying to keep my face neutral, but inside I felt like a volcano that had been building pressure for years, about to erupt. Then she said the words that made everything feel like the floor dropped away. My biological father was someone she had known for only a brief time, someone she had thought would be a passing figure in her life, and yet he had left a permanent mark that she could never erase. She paused, and my throat tightened, and I could feel everyone looking at me, waiting, and I realized I had been holding my breath. I asked her quietly if that meant I was not really her son, and she said of course I was, but that the truth was complicated. My mind spun because it felt like she had just handed me a puzzle with missing pieces. Then Nora spoke. She had been silent for most of the evening, the way she always is when she is processing, and she said she had known for a while, that she had seen Mom struggle, and she had tried to help in whatever way she could. I felt a mix of relief and resentment at the same time because I was grateful she had been there for Mom, but angry she hadn't told me sooner. I thought about the years we had shared, the inside jokes, the fights over small things, the way she always seemed to be the preferred child, and now I realized that preference had been reinforced by a secret I was only just hearing. The conversation shifted when my mother explained why she had changed the will, why Nora was the one receiving the larger portion of her estate. She said Nora had been the one to carry the burden of this truth alongside her, to hold her accountable, to help her navigate the fear of revealing it, and that she had felt it fair to reward that loyalty. I felt a sharp stab of betrayal because I'd never asked for money or favors, but I'd expected honesty, and this cut deeper than any slight to my purse. I tried to speak, tried to ask questions, but my voice felt small, like it would not carry over the hum of the fans and the clinking of silverware. I asked her if she felt like she had favored Nora because of me, and she nodded slightly, her eyes brimming. I realized then that my mother was human in ways I had not wanted to acknowledge, fragile and scared, and the weight of that scared made me both sympathetic and furious. As the discussion went on, relatives began asking questions, curious as to what could have prompted this gathering. Aunt Marlene, who is always nosy, kept tilting her head and asking if there was more to tell, and my cousin Ezra chimed in, trying to lighten the mood, but only caused my stomach to knot tighter. I kept thinking about this man who could be my real father, about all the moments I'd carried his memory without knowing, about how the person I had considered irrelevant in my life had somehow shaped my DNA and my identity in ways I'd never have imagined. Nora leaned over and whispered that she knew I was feeling lost and that it was normal, and I wanted to push her away, but I let her hand brush against mine for a second. It was confusing because I wanted support, yet also space to scream. Finally, my mom brought up the next part, the revelation about my biological father's involvement in my life. She said he had wanted to meet me once she told him about me, that he had watched from afar, that he had never interfered but had been aware, and that he had a family of his own, a life separate from ours. That part was dizzying for my head because I did not know whether to feel curiosity, anger, or resentment, and I did not know how to separate the man I knew as Dad from the man I may have a claim to by blood. I felt like standing in a river, being pulled by currents I had no control over. I asked if I could see him, if there was a chance, and Mom said she could arrange it, that he would agree, but warned that it might not be what I expected. I felt a cold flicker of hope and fear at the same time. As the night went on, I sat quietly, watching my family interact, realizing how many moments I had taken for granted, how many smiles and arguments had been built upon half-truths. I kept thinking about the man I had always called Dad and how much he loved me, and how even though he was not my biological father, his love had shaped the man I am today. I thought about Nora, about Mom, about everyone sitting around that table and realized this gathering was no longer just about inheritance. It was about identity, belonging, and the messy, tangled way families grow and survive. I left that night feeling numb and restless, knowing everything had changed but also realizing I had a chance to understand it, to confront it, to redefine who I was, and yet I could not shake the feeling that the hardest revelations were still coming. The days after the gathering were a blur of tension and half-formed thoughts. I could not focus at work, with every turn of a wrench or rev of an engine reminding me of how disconnected I felt from my own life. In my head, I continued to replay conversations, searching for answers that weren't there, wondering if my anger was directed toward Mom, toward Nora, or toward the invisible man who had unconsciously shaped me. I started to notice the little things I had previously ignored: my brown eyes that didn't quite match Nora's hazel eyes, my stubbornness that seemed more like his than my dad's, the way I reacted to stress as though I'd inherited some silent temperament. I continued to ask myself if I wanted to meet him, and every time I tried to make up my mind, my stomach twisted as if I were about to fall off a cliff. Finally, the opportunity came sooner than expected. Mom called one evening and said he had agreed to see me, that he had been curious about me, that he wanted to meet me on neutral ground, a small cafe in a part of town I did not usually go to. I remember at 12 sitting in my car, hands gripping the wheel, heart hammering so loud it was sure the people in the cafe would hear it through the walls. I rehearsed what I would say, but every word sounded hollow. My mind was a swirl of images of my father who had raised me, Nora's calm but tense face, my mother's guilt-stricken eyes, and this stranger who was now, inexplicably, part of me. I walked inside, saw him sitting there, a man around 40, with hair that was just starting to gray at the temples, wearing a faded jacket and a watch that looked to have been in his family for years. He looked up and smiled, a small, uncertain smile, and I felt this weird mixture of anger and curiosity and longing. We shook hands, and for a moment, nothing was said. I could see in his eyes that he was nervous, that he had probably imagined this meeting countless times and now it was real. I asked him if he knew anything about me, and he nodded. He said he had always wondered, always wanted to be part of my life in some way, but circumstances had never allowed it. I felt my chest tighten because it was everything and nothing at once. I asked him why he had never reached out, why he had let my mom handle everything alone, and he said he had been afraid, that he thought she was protecting me, protecting everyone, and that he'd been too cowardly to step in. I wanted to yell at him, wanted to shake him, wanted to demand answers, but I didn't. I just listened, letting his words wash over me, letting myself absorb a truth I had never imagined. We talked for hours, and in between the awkward pauses and uncertain laughs, I realized that I had been holding on to a kind of resentment that was half invented, half real, and it was exhausting. I thought about how many decisions my mom had made for me, how many she had carried alone, and I realized she had loved me fiercely in her own flawed way, just as she loved Nora. I thought about Nora, who had known and had tried to hold it together for all of us, and I felt a complicated kind of gratitude and frustration at the same time. By the time I left the cafe, I felt lighter in some ways, though heavier in others. The identity crisis I had been wrestling with did not disappear, but the edges felt less jagged, less like I was dangling over a precipice. A week later, I went back to Mom's to talk again, and she sat me down with a small smile and said she was proud of how I had handled the meeting. I told her I still had questions, and she said that was fair. We talked about the will, about why she had favored Nora, and I began to understand that it was never about fairness in the way I had imagined. It was about survival, about managing a fragile system that could have broken if anything shifted too suddenly. I started to see Nora differently, not just as the sister who had always seemed more composed and responsible, but as someone who had carried weight silently, who had protected me in ways I had never considered. The next day, I ran into Nora unexpectedly at a bookstore downtown. She was holding a stack of novels, and her face lit up when she saw me. We walked outside, the wind soft on our faces, and she said she had been worried about me, that she didn't want me to feel abandoned or less than. I told her I had been angry, and she nodded, understanding, and then said something that hit me harder than anything before, that she had been angry, too, for all the years of carrying a secret she didn't ask for. I realized then that the betrayal I had felt was not one-sided, that our family had been navigating this secret like a tightrope, and none of us had the luxury of dropping it. I felt a strange sense of connection, as if understanding the shared burden somehow made it less heavy. That evening, I went back home, sat on my couch, and thought about my life in a way I had never done before. I thought about who I was biologically, who I was emotionally, who I had been shaped to be by love, by loss, by secrets. I realized that identity is not just about blood, it's about memory, about trust, about the people who see you, even when you are flawed, even when you are unaware. Over the next few weeks, I began to interact with my mother and Nora differently. I listened more, asked questions, let them see my anger and my curiosity, and gradually, I began to piece together a sense of self that felt more authentic. I even started reaching out to the man who was my biological father, talking over the phone, sharing small stories, realizing that he was a stranger and a connection at the same time. My life was messy, yes, full of moral ambiguity, secrets, and unexpected revelations, but I began to understand that it was also rich, layered, and alive. I remembered the kitchen that night when Mom first told me, the heaviness of her eyes, the way the words had landed on me like bricks, and I realized that I could forgive her without excusing the secrecy, that I could love my sister without ignoring the complexity of her role, and that I could acknowledge my biological father without replacing the man I had always called Dad. It was all messy, all real, and I felt for the first time in months that I could breathe without feeling like I was being crushed from the inside. Still, I knew the story was far from over, that there would be awkward conversations, moments of doubt, and days when I questioned everything all over again. But for now, I sat quietly in my room one night, listening to the hum of the city outside, and I felt a fragile kind of peace settling over me, as if understanding and acceptance were finally possible, even when life refuses to be simple. The final confrontation happened unexpectedly, in the middle of a rainy Sunday afternoon when I had gone back to Mom's to help clean up the backyard after a storm. Nora was there, damp hair clinging to her forehead, and Mom trying to steady the folding chairs while muttering about how clumsy I had become. I could feel the tension in the air, the kind that doesn't come from the weather, but years of unspoken truths finally colliding with the present. I had spent weeks talking to my biological father, learning bits and pieces about him, and every conversation had left me both more curious and more unsettled, peering into a life that could have been mine, a life that might have been different in ways I was only beginning to imagine. My mother watched me gather the wet leaves, and for a moment, our eyes met, and I saw exhaustion, guilt, and a kind of hope all mixed together. So I asked the question that had been nagging at me since that night in the kitchen: why she kept it from me for so long, why she favored Nora, and why she felt the secret needed to be carried by more than just one person. She took a deep breath, her shoulders sagging as she admitted she had been afraid that if the truth came out too soon, it would shatter everything, that I might hate her and Nora resent her for the choices she had made. She said she thought she was protecting everyone, but now she realized protection had a cost, and she hated that cost had been my sense of self. I felt the anger rise again, sharp and bitter, but it was mixed with something else: understanding. I realized that this wasn't about malice, wasn't about favoritism, but fear, human fear, and the flawed ways it manifests. Nora came closer, her voice barely above a whisper, and said she always wanted to tell me, but felt trapped between loyalty to Mom and fear of hurting me. My chest tightened because I knew she was telling the truth, and she had silently carried her own weight. I started to cry without meaning to, the first real tears I'd cried since the revelation started, and both of them reached out, letting me cry into their presence without judgment. It was raw, messy, and human in a way that no tidy explanation could ever capture. Eventually, the conversation turned to my biological father, the man who had been waiting in the wings of my life like a shadow I'd never noticed. Mom said he had wanted to meet me only when she was certain I was ready, that she had tried to prepare him and me both for what that meeting might bring. I asked Nora what she thought, and she shrugged, wet hair sticking to her face, and said that she thought it was important I make my own choice. I decided then to meet him again, this time at our family home, sitting in the living room where I had spent countless hours growing up, imagining this moment 1,000 times but never in real life. When he walked through the door, I felt a strange kind of familiarity, as if some part of me had known him all along, and yet he was a stranger too. We talked about small things first: the weather, the neighborhood, the smells of the house, and then about more complicated things, about choices, about secrets, about identity. He admitted he had made mistakes, that he had stayed away, that he had hoped I would never need him, and I realized that he had been living with guilt just like Mom and Nora, just like me. I asked him if he regretted anything, and he said yes, but that regret did not define him, just as it did not define me. The conversation became intimate in an odd way, the kind of intimacy that comes with shared vulnerability rather than with familiarity, and I felt the tension in my chest ease just a little, replaced by a cautious curiosity about what it meant to have another person connected to me by blood, without replacing the family I already had. Over the next few weeks, I began to integrate this new truth into my life. I spoke more openly with Mom and Nora, asking questions, expressing doubts, letting them see my confusion. I started writing letters to my biological father, reflecting on memories I had, imagining what traits I had inherited, acknowledging the strange blend of anger, gratitude, and curiosity I felt. I noticed subtle changes in myself. I carried a little more patience, a little more empathy, a little more awareness of how complicated human hearts could be. The moral conflicts had not vanished. Sometimes I still felt bitterness, a pang of jealousy for the life I had never known, a desire for simplicity that would never return. But the anger had softened into something more manageable, something that allowed me to see the humanity in everyone involved, even when it was messy and painful. I realized that identity is not fixed, that family is not just blood, and that love does not require perfection, only effort, honesty, and a willingness to carry each other's burdens, even when they are uncomfortable. The day I finally sat down with Mom and Nora for dinner and no one mentioned the will or secrets or mistakes, I felt a strange sense of relief, a moment of normalcy that was almost sacred. I laughed at a joke Nora made about Ezra burning the potatoes, and Mom scolded us both playfully, and for a moment, the past months of tension and revelation felt suspended, like we were allowed to just exist without the weight of hidden truths pressing down. Later that night, I sat alone in my room, reflecting on everything: the confessions, the anger, the meetings, the revelations, and I realized that while my life had been built on partial truths, it had also been built on love, on care, on moments of shared humanity. And I knew the moral conflicts, the questions about loyalty, fairness, and identity, would never fully go away, but they no longer paralyzed me. I had been forced to face the messy reality of human relationships, and in those relationships, I had found resilience, compassion, and a deeper understanding of myself and those around me. And yes, I knew that for the rest of my life, the story of my parentage, the secret that had been kept from me, and the complicated love of my family would be one I would carry. But it no longer had the power to define me entirely. I could choose how to live with it, how to interact with those I loved, how to move forward without allowing the past to dictate every decision I made. The house was still. I acknowledged that life is often uncomfortable, unfair, and full of unexpected revelations, but it is also full of possibilities for understanding, for growth, and for connection. I knew the conversations were not over. New tensions might arise, feelings would flare, and the questions would continue to emerge. But for the first time, I felt capable of navigating all of it without losing myself. It was a fragile peace, the kind that comes from knowing the full weight of your past and accepting it without letting it crush you. I thought about the man I had always called Dad, about Nora, about Mom, about the stranger who was also my father, and I realized that love, loyalty, and identity are not simple, but they are worth wrestling with, worth understanding, and worth holding on to even when the truths are uncomfortable. Life would never be tidy, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe without guilt, without confusion, without the crushing weight of secrets.